Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar. I'm joined this afternoon by Matthias Rasking of Accenture, and I'm also joined by Shoaib Javed of Worksoft. And today our presenters are going to be presenting 5 digital age trends that will drastically impact testing and quality skills. If you have any questions for Matthias or Shoaib, please type them into the questions field on your control panel and we will get to them a little later on in the presentation. So for now, let me hand you over to our presenters.
Okay, thank you very much. Direct, this is Matthias Rasking. Welcome everybody. Let me put you on full screen mode so that you can actually see something. Welcome to the webinar hosted by EuroSTAR. We're very happy to be a platinum sponsor of EuroSTAR this year again after a tremendous experience we had last year. We had a lot of fun at EuroSTAR definitely, and definitely looking forward to this year's edition. What we brought to you today is a webinar based on Accenture research we have been doing on how digital is reshaping the world of technology as a whole, but specifically what does this mean to the world of testing and quality. We'll walk you through some of the trends that our research labs have identified. I'll explain some of the impact that we see of these trends on us as testers, both from a role and skill perspective, but also from an organizational perspective. I'll use some additional research we did on digital testing strategies to give some more examples. And then I've invited Shoaib from our partner Worksoft to talk a little bit about one of the key trends, namely intelligent automation, and what he has seen with his clients and how Worksoft can help in that space. Of course, more than happy to take any questions. Please feel free to put them into the chat. We'll monitor that throughout and try to answer as many as possible, and we'll definitely have time available at the end of the webinar as well to answer any and all questions that you might have. With that, let me get started. Maybe a brief introduction on myself. I'm a principal director out of our Kronberg, Germany office. I've been with Accenture for over 15 years now, and I have responsibility for our testing practice here in Europe, Latin America, and Africa, which means in the Accenture context, we have 14 delivery centers here in this region, out of which we have testing services that we provide for our clients, in addition to all the local consultants we have in each of the countries in this region. So it's a fairly sizable group of people, testing specialists. We recruit people into a testing career track, and you can go all the way up to the director level in our testing practice, which is a horizontal layer that spans all of the industries and all of the different technologies that we have. In that function, I've been obviously involved a lot with the different trends, but my main role is actually that of a senior test advisor for clients, where I happily look at topics around test strategy, mostly organizational behavior, organizational design, and change management to improve testing, to do test process improvement, to do assessments and analytics around testing, and to really help clients prepare for the new digital age. Shoaib will have a few words on himself later on, but let me show to you what we're trying to get out of today's session. What we have seen very clearly is that the world is moving very rapidly. In some areas, in some industries, technology has advanced quite a lot over the past couple of years, with ecosystems changing rapidly, with the way you release software and you develop software changing very rapidly. Other industries are a bit behind that. But what we have seen over and over again in our research is that in order to be successful in this world, we need to enable not only our technology, not only tools, but our people to be able to actually use that technology to the best extent. As we always say, a fool with a tool is still a fool. It doesn't really help you if you have great tools out there, whether it's open source or commercial tools, or you developed it yourself. Your people need to understand what the pressures in the digital age are and how do you actually adapt to that. which means companies and testing organizations need to equip people with not only the right tools, but with the right skills and with the right mindset. What we'll take a look at today is, as I mentioned, some key digital age trends based on the Accenture Technology Vision. This is an annual paper that our technology labs publish, and we'll take a look at the evolution of the last couple of years and how things have transformed, and then I'll walk you through the 5 key trends and their impact on testing as we see it. We've also sponsored a study by Pierre Dahl Consultants at the end of last year that took a look at digital testing across Europe, and I'll mention some key facts of that study. There are links to both this study and the Accenture Technology Vision attached in the deck, which you can then download from the EuroSTAR resources page after the webinar for further reading, and of course more than happy if you reach out to me for any further questions. And then Shoaib will take one of the trends, intelligent automation, to take a look at end-to-end process automation, what this means, how you can achieve high velocity in that space. If we take a look at the Accenture Technology Vision, like I said, it's an annual thing. Basically, every February when we publish this, a new cycle of research immediately starts. And if you look at the evolution of the Technology Vision, you'll spot that obviously a couple of years ago, digital was front and center, something that we started to notice more and more, going from the theme of every business is a digital business to the very popular theme of digital disruption. What we do see now...
Could you please remove your control bar from your screen? Thanks.
Oh, okay. There's somewhere in there. Sorry, I didn't notice that you were seeing them. Thanks for reminding me. What we've seen over the past years, though, is that it's not so much, again, about the technology and how that disrupts the business, how organizations and how people in those organizations can actually use the new digital possibilities to really bring software up to speed and to really reap benefits for the business side. Which means in 2015, the topic was around stretching boundaries. How can you really use digital technologies? How can you use cloud-based software? How can you use analytics? How can you use social media and information in there to really expand what you're doing? And of course, first it came from the production side, but we see this more and more happening on the testing side as well, with things like cognitive testing, where you can use analytics from production, but also from your historical releases to really shape your regression test approach and test a lot smarter than what you did before. And the main topic for a couple of years now was what does this actually mean for the role of a tester? And this year's topic for the Accenture Technology Vision is people first, the primacy of people in the digital age. How do we equip our people with the right skills, with the right mindset? And in order to show you what this actually means, I have this graphic for you where you see the key trends, the 6 trends of 2014, starting with the digital physical blur, from workforce to crowdsource and to the 5 trends of 2015 and the 5 trends of 2016. And we've tried to map these to see how are these trends evolving. I mean, obviously our research team is interested in not only trying to predict what will really change the world in the next couple of years, but we're also very interested in what happened to the trends that we have predicted and how are they actually morphing, how are they changing, and how are they changing the world that we live in. And if you take one example, if you take the second trend from the left-hand side on 2014, from workforce to crowdsource, you'll see that in 2015 this actually morphed into the workforce reimagined trend and now into the liquid workforce. And I'll show you what liquid workforce actually means, but this means that we do see some of the trends over and over again. We do see some of the trends that are becoming stronger, that are actually disrupting the business, and we see some trends moving away. For example, the resilience trend that we've seen that actually moved into the platform revolution, now into a platform economy, where it's less about resilience of individual systems that's shaping the discussions of the future and more about how do we actually use platforms. Yes, platforms need to be resilient, but what does this mean from a testing point of view? Now, if I look at the 2016 technology version, these are the 5 trends that we've identified. Now, These trends on the one hand mean that there is a lot of change coming towards us, and we need to embrace that. We need to take care that we're actually leading in this space, and we embrace not only the change that comes with it, but we enable our people to be able to do that as well. And of course, these also means opportunities for us. I mean, if we as a testing organization, for example, are able to move away from our, let's say, rigid mindset of all I need is certified people and standardized processes and then can deliver any quality that I want, to something that's a little bit more flexible, that uses approaches from the context-driven school of testing, that uses a nice balance of a tool chain, and that uses the possibilities, then I think we're a good step ahead of the competition. And this means, though, that our testers also need to be not only retrained, they need to learn new skills altogether. And I'm not only talking about technical skills, for example, that if you want to create a new open source automation framework based on Selenium and maybe feeding in to Cucumber and getting some more information in your DevOps world, those are technical skills that are nice, but what you need to understand as a tester, how do I use all of that information? What does it mean for me? When can I test certain things, and how can I test all of that? So let me walk you through these individual trends, starting with intelligent automation. Now, this is trend number one. I like the tagline here, that automation is becoming the co-worker for the digital age. For too many years, we've treated automation as only a productivity lever. We've only treated it as something that helps us automate the execution space, where we can automate our test scripts, and then we're fine with that. And ideally, we can do unattended execution so that we have robust scripts and nobody needs to sit in front of the machine and watch the script go along. But that's really not all. Showup will walk you through some examples, and I mention that later on as well as we step into that. But intelligent automation can do a lot more and needs to be embedded in the full life cycle. I'll get back to this point as I hand then over to Showup. So let's take a look at trend number two, liquid workforce. The liquid workforce is a trend that we see obviously not only in the testing space. I mean, for many years we've worked with websites and with platforms like the Mechanical Turk and things like that, where you can basically rent people on demand. You have, many of you will be involved in crowd testing solutions like Applause and others out there that provide you a vast array of testers from all categories, whether they're trained and certified or whether they simply have an interest in this topic, to different areas. In test centers that many of us are working in today, you do have a demand workflow, but we've seen two things happening. On the one hand, the digital era puts a lot more pressure on demand-driven frameworks, which means a lot of our clients are moving to things like unit-based models, output-based models, instead of trying to create a plan for the full release. We're trying to do this at a lot more granular level, because as more and more clients are moving into Agile, moving into DevOps approaches from a testing organization, we also need to make sure we can actually react to any changes that are coming there. But secondly, we've also seen that as soon as we release our piece of software, something else in the ecosystem will change, whether it's a new device that's popping up, whether it's an operating system change, or whether it's simple system or user behavior that is changing, because there are other things out there. We don't really know anymore how our software will be used out there. It's not as previously, where software was only used by a very dedicated group of users and we knew exactly what they were doing. If in today's world you create, for example, a ticketing system for a railway or transportation company, of course there needs to be a mobile app. It needs to work across all different devices, and you can be sure that not only people from example Germany will use it, all kinds of visitors will use it, which brings a lot more testing challenges with it. What does this mean for the role of a tester? This is to some extent a digital culture shock to not only testing organizations but to release organizations. As soon as you release the software, you can be sure that it's not just another quarterly release and you do some regression testing around that. You can be sure that within a couple of days the software will fail in the wild, and you need to make sure that you have very rapid cycles in order to not only spot those incidents, but be able to rectify them, to retest them, and to bring it back into production. This is something that a lot of organizations are learning the hard way. There are a lot of companies out there that look at it from a tool perspective. How can I, for example, replicate dozens of devices? How can I replicate network conditions so that I make sure I'm prepared for that? But at the end of the day, it's around learnability and adaptability. How do I make sure my people who are ultimately responsible for the quality of the software that they release, how do I make sure that they actually think about what will happen, and how do I make sure that they incorporate that into their test approach? Which means what we see, on the other hand, is that this is a skill that is very strongly looked after. I want to be able to have people who understand what happens to the software later in a life cycle, but I also need to make sure I have multi-skilled people. And the agile premise of having multifunctional teams is excellent here, because that means that I will have those skills in my team. Nevertheless, I need to make sure that we take a look at all of this from a quality mindset. So the opportunity that we see arising from a liquid workforce in the testing space is, on the one hand, that you take your existing testing team and you look for options to extend it. Use an internal crowd of business analysts, for example, that can go through a lot of exploratory testing. Take a look at global teams to expedite the process, to make sure you have different devices, network conditions, and everything in there. Look for crowd testing providers to make sure you cover all of the X's and O's. But it's not important that you really try to even achieve 100% test coverage. It's important that you visualize this and that you understand where you might have gaps, and that you then continue with the process, that you take a look at your regression test scope, at your overall test scope, and you understand the incidents that we see popping up. Why did we actually miss them, and use analytics in there. Ultimately, we see that this will lead to a smaller testing team per se. I mean, DevOps and Agile have already tremendously reduced the need for large-scale testing later on in the life cycle. Shift left is something that probably was used 10 years ago already, meaning that we need to be able to shift quality to the left of the life cycle. We need to bake quality into the life cycle instead of trying to test quality into the software at a very late stage. And this is nothing new. 1976, this was already reported, but now we actually, with Agile, with DevOps, we see this really happening. Not enough in my opinion yet. We focus a lot too much on unit testing and things like that instead of really on requirements quality. But in some areas, there are very promising results there. With such a reduced team, though, this means that we need to make sure we have the right skills in there. So massive open online courses, MOOC, for example, is something that we need to take a look at. How do we enable our teams to get those skills? At Accenture, for example, we use learning boards, which are very quick-hitting training modules, simple video snippets between 3 to 10 minutes, for example, that you can get up to speed on a new topic, can be tutorials. We have connected learning, which means we use video conferencing technology to make sure that we can broadcast trainings all over the world, and people can really participate in those things. And of course, on-the-job learning is something that is still very relevant. And then finally, if we extend our testing workforce, we need to understand reward mechanisms for that. And it's not about career progression anymore. If you look at crowd testing vendors, they use a lot of badges, for example. They use gamification elements to make sure people are interested and actually people stay with relevant skills. And this is something that we've had quite some success with companies and testing centers to implement gamification techniques to get them to collaborate more and actually be fully involved in the release as well. So summarizing, one of the key trends that we're seeing is that the workforce is becoming a lot more flexible than in the past, which means we need to take a look at testers, we need to maybe reskill them, and we need to make sure they are ready for that next stage. With dynamic testing organizations where you have a central team, where you have distributed teams, plus maybe an extended crowd testing team, we think is the right answer to be able to successfully master this trend. Trend number 3 talks about the platform economy, and we've seen this first a couple of years in the SaaS world, in the software as a service world, where a lot of vendors popped up and provided a platform that others could deploy software in. This is what's meant by business model innovation from the outside in. You're not the only organization out there, you're not the only ones who can innovate, and we see very similar things happening in the testing world. On the one hand, of course, we need to understand how we test such platforms. How would I test something that was built on Amazon Web Services, for example, or how do I use technologies to actually do that testing, but we also need to think about rebalancing testing. It's not about making sure we have all requirements in there, getting a complete test coverage and then testing one script after the other. We need a lot more exploratory testing. We need a lot more intelligent risk-based testing. There are vendors out there who can help a lot with the mathematics around that, but at the end of the day, it's the understanding of the tester plus the collaboration with the business side so that you understand what's the inherent risk in this particular change. And then, of course, for any platform, we need to make sure we use virtualization as much as possible so that we can virtualize services, virtualize interfaces as early as possible in the life cycle to give our teams really the opportunity to test in an end-to-end manner, to simulate a lot more processes than they can do today. That's only the one impact. How do we actually test such platforms? The opportunity, of course, is that we could turn the testing world into a platform in it by itself as well. Accenture has invested heavily over the last couple of years into two platforms. One is the omnichannel digital testing platform, and the other one is called Touchless Automation, which will be released soon, which means we're building platforms that anyone can then test on, and we've done that internally for a number of years. We're ready to release that now to make sure that clients can really use that for their own testing purposes. And what we want to do with that is we want to foster innovation on that. We want to make sure that the testing processes are on that platform together with tools, together with techniques, together with coaching for approaches and consulting. All of that together can be used similar to how you would do it in a software as a service approach, where you have a platform and somebody helps you get a new website or a new application out of the bushes very quickly. The premise that we see here, or the big opportunity that we see here, is that such a testing platform will be much closer to business. The business has access to that. They actually see how things are being tested, and they see how quality is evolving in their actual product. And in the age of agile and digital, we see a very big promise in that. Predictable disruption is our trend number 4. This is what I mentioned earlier when I talked about the liquid workforce. We actually, in many cases and in many consulting engagements that I have, we got called to the job relatively late in the game, and somebody in the release team or in the project team realized that there is something out there and we need to prepare for that, but we really don't know why. And since we weren't able to plan for that because we don't really know how that disrupts everything, it's difficult for us to say how should we approach that, how should we create a test strategy for that. Now, this is one way to approach it. The other way to approach it is simply say, well, we know that things will change once my software has been released. We need to understand that there are things happening out there. There are new devices coming into the market. There's changing user behavior and everything else, which means the impact is that our predictive planning needs to get much better. We need to be much better connected with the business process, with the business owners, so that we learn from them once we have implemented the software what will happen in the future, but also the feedback that they're getting, that we can use that a lot quicker in the testing world as well. Which means business-driven testing is something that we have been advocating for a long time now. It's not about including business analysts in the testing teams per se. It's about making sure that, you know, from a testing point of view, we know what can go wrong, we know where things can be disrupted, so we need to feed this back to the business side, and we need to actually have discussions with them. How will this requirement change, and what will this actually mean once we're in production? From an opportunity point of view, we have a lot of data available. We have historical release data available. We know exactly root causes of defects and incidents. It's difficult to tie this data together, but with the power of analytics, we can move more and more into machine learning opportunities. We can move more and more into cognitive testing to really understand and visualize areas that have been tested properly, areas where we see a lot of gaps, and then we use this predictability to actually be at the forefront of everything. Trend number 5 is around digital trust. Let me get a sip of water. I'll be right back. So. Sorry, I had a frog there in my throat. Trend number 5, digital trust. I mean, security is all around us, and as you see here, it's around strengthening customer relationship. As testers, we're the ones who need to make sure that whatever is being developed, whatever has been put into production, lives up to customer expectations. Of course, we're not the only ones, and 10 years ago, everybody would look at us if a software fails, if a release doesn't go alive very well. This has changed dramatically with agile teams, with scrum teams, where you have responsibility for the product as a team, not as an individual or as a testing organization. Nevertheless, this is something that we need to work on continuously, which means security testing will have an even bigger impact. And again, similar to the way we test for disruptive things that happen after we go live, this is not about being able to test cohesively and be able to test everything in the world, but we need to be able to say these are the things that we have tested, these are areas that we haven't tested, and therefore how do we build more trust into the system afterwards, how do we enable operations to make sure they understand which areas have been tested and what can happen in production, but we also need to use validation approaches and again use big data and analytics to be better prepared for any eventualities. So one of the themes here is that we're moving from testers to trust builders, and an example I like using is a couple of months ago for one of our insurance clients. We were called in to test their new platform which they use for journalists and press agencies all over the world. So this is a platform where you get your press releases, where you get new product updates and so on. So obviously quite important to them and with very high visibility. If something goes wrong there, the press will know about it and will obviously write about it. And they were building this new platform, actually consolidating a lot of product information databases, marketing database, press database, and so on into one nice system, all with responsive design and use technology. But unfortunately, 6 weeks before go live, they realized they hadn't looked at performance nor security at all. Now, don't ask me how they were missing that. I don't really care. At the end of the day, what we took a look at was telling them, look, here's a testing team, and they will give both your business side but also the operations team the trust in the system. So we quickly put together a set of testing strategies, a set of testing behaviors using exploratory testing but also scripted testing to understand from a security and non-function testing, so performance testing point of view, what can happen in production. The goal was not to be able to test everything. There simply was not enough time for that, but the goal was to show the client if this thing happens, both from the business and from the IT operations side, what do you need to do then? How do you need to ramp up your business monitoring, your operational monitoring? How do you need to ramp up your alerting, your failover mechanisms, and so on? And this was something where we were not testers anymore. We didn't go against certain scripted requirements and try to prove that they were working. We were looking at the system overall. We were trying to get the trust of both organizations back into the IT so that they saw, okay, this is what's working functionally and this is what will happen once we're in production, and therefore once we go live, I trust that my teams will be able to handle any of these eventualities. So this example of collaborative innovation is what we need to go further and further with, and a lot of our projects and clients are already using ethical hacking, for example. We have a lot of campaigns, spot phishing, for example, and things like that. And this is something that, most of our applications will have to deal with, because at the end of the day, there's a wider impact of all of our applications now with microservices, with platform economies, and so on. And as testers, we're the ones to make sure to put the spotlight on that. Now, like I said, end of last year, we conducted a study, or PRO consultants conducted that on our behalf, to take a look at what do we actually see in the world of digital and when it comes to testing. Now, the full results are later on in the deck. You can download the executive summary and some nice infographics around that. But I mean, a lot of companies that I work with say, yes, we need a strategy for testing digital applications, but I'm not really sure where to start, what exactly means digital. And then you can have, acronyms like SMAC, social media, mobile, analytics, and cloud. You can bundle a couple of other technologies into digital as well. At the end of the day, I don't see this as very diverging interests anymore. I do see that all businesses are a digital business, all technologies are moving into the digital world. You can name whatever you want digital. At the end of the day, you need to understand how to test my business processes, my workflows end-to-end across the individual applications that are out there, regardless of whether they were developed in an agile model, whether they use DevOps, whether they were developed in a waterfall model. But this is one of the key reasons why I see that very few companies, at least in Europe, so this was a European study, actually have a digital testing strategy in place, and why a lot of them are not really ready yet to implement one. And if you look at some of the challenges and priorities that these organizations mentioned, there were over 200 who responded to the survey. You see that in the digital age, things are more or less the same. I mean, of course there are budget pressures. We'd like to test more and more, but then again, maybe we need to be able to test smart instead of testing more. Quality is the #1 testing goal at the end of the day, regardless of budget constraints. Functional priorities are always there. The testing team needs to understand functionality. We saw security testing move up this ladder of priorities. And what I mentioned earlier in the liquid workforce trend, skills are increasingly more difficult to find. We're not talking about a test manager who has industry or domain skills. We're talking about people who understand the full development lifecycle, who can work in both Agile and DevOps models, who can work on a test approach that incorporates both regression testing, both automation, plus exploratory testing, plus context-driven testing, and all of those things. Those are the kinds of skills we're looking for, and they have been increasingly hard to find. And if you look at tools, yes, tools are important, but at the end of the day, there are a lot of tools out there. You need to find one that really helps you testing business processes end-to-end. You need to find a tool that incorporates a lot of the other topics in there, where you can automate judiciously, you can automate what's necessary, but you not only automate the execution part, you automate the analytics part, you automate the test planning part. And this brings me back to trend #1 around intelligent automation. We have a lot of applications out there who try to suggest workflows, who try to do a lot of work on behalf of the worker. Because automation, if we look at it, has been in place for business process automation for many decades already. And these algorithms need to be tested more and more. And for that, of course, we need intelligent test data, which means we need to be able to use cognitive approaches and need to be able to look at innovation not only within our testing organization but outside of it as well. Automation frameworks are well and nice. They need to learn, they need to self-correct, they need to be able to use information based on past releases, based on past incidents, to be able to understand how we need to adapt those automation frameworks. But of course, we also need to have robust test automation tools and frameworks who can adapt to a certain scenario as they execute test cases. Because it's no use to me if I have 1,000 test cases automated, I kick off the scripts overnight, and then I come back just to see that test script #2 failed. So they need to be a lot more error-proof, they need to be a lot more resilient than before. And one thing that we're investing heavily in is the idea of testing savants, which means robots that provide suggestions to what needs to be tested based on risk assessments, based on historical data. And these are little helpers for a test manager, something that a traditional test manager might or might not have seen, and we want to take the guessing game out of that. We want to be able to predict a lot more, and we want to be able to use data that is available out there to show to test managers what are actually the things that you need to get tested and why do you need to get them tested in this and such order. Now, with this, I'll hand over to Shoaib on the trend of intelligent automation and ask him to explain how we can, what they have seen in the industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. Those were some really interesting insights. Hi, everyone. I'm Shoaib Javed, Chief Technology Officer of WorkSoft. So I spend most of my time working with our customers to help them define practical automation approaches that they can use on a day-to-day basis. And I'm going to talk about some of those and more specifically about a use case that brings things together. So in my part of the webinar, I'm going to discuss intelligent automation and how you can actually implement that in your own enterprise application landscape. Matthias, could you put up my slide, please? So before we get started, I wanted to outline the problem in a slightly different way than you might be used to looking at it, right? So if you run even a moderately complex enterprise application landscape, you'll immediately realize that you'll have to deal with a much larger number of applications these days. And the main reason for that is people now want to use exactly the applications that they like, and also cloud-based applications tend to be narrowly focused. So the end result of all of that is there will be a much larger number of applications that people have to deal with, and the days of monolithic single applications that did everything are over. So if you look at the larger number of applications, the other thing that you'll also notice is that each of those applications change much more frequently than they did before. So the pace of change is also accelerating, just like the number of applications are increasing. And then finally, a large part of your application landscape, of applications that are critical to your business, you don't control anymore because you're sourcing them from somebody through the cloud, right? So if you use applications, for example, like Salesforce.com or ServiceNow or name any other such application, you are not in control of when changes occur on those applications. Right? So if we summarize this, you have a larger number of applications, they change much more frequently, and a large part of your enterprise application landscape is not under your control. So how do you tackle this? How do you try to manage testing in such an environment? So what we have done and what most of our clients have done is look at it from the business perspective, right? So instead of looking at hundreds of individual applications, take a look at what business processes are critical to you, what business processes actually run your business, and then deal with those, right? So deal with it on a business level rather than individual application level. So if you then do that, there are a couple of things that you need to look at, right? One, do you actually understand how your business processes sort of bob and weave their way through these applications, right? So how does a business process use these applications and which applications are used by those business processes? That's one part, understanding how the overall business works across these enterprise applications. And then the second part is, will those business processes continue to work with all of their variations in all of the regions that you want to do business in when something changes, right? So if an individual enterprise application changes, does the overall business still work, right? So those are the two things that you'd have to look at on an ongoing basis to make sure that you don't have business impacting disruptions when you are updating or changing your enterprise applications. Okay, so how do you do this? So let's start with looking at high velocity testing. Next slide, please. Okay, so how often should you be testing, right? This is a question that you have to ask, because if everything's changing every day or every hour, then it makes logical sense that you should be testing every hour. Of course, I'm not implying that you should test everything every hour. What I'm saying is you have to test at least something every hour or every minute to match the frequency of change that you're applying to production, right? So it becomes really interesting to figure out what's really important and what should be tested, because you're testing at such a high frequency. Of course, it's practically impossible for you to test everything all the time, right? So let's look at what should we do to address this, and how should we construct an overall automation strategy to manage this. So next slide, please, Matthias. Okay, so what we have honed in on after doing this dozens and dozens of times with some very large customers is a few simple steps that you have to take to sort of approach the problem in the right way, right? So the first part, of course, is focus on the end user, right? So it's very important to understand how your users are actually using your applications, and here automation software can help, right? So the software can actually help you capture end user interactions and then construct a view of how your end-to-end business process then works across all of those applications. So this is called automated business process discovery. If you monitor what your end users do across dozens of applications, across dozens of invocations of your business, then you have a pretty good idea of what's important, what the most commonly used paths are, and so on. So getting this information is critical, because all of the rest of your decision making will then depend on what's really important to your business, what's really important to your end users, and getting an objective view of this rather than a subjective view is very important here, right? So automation here can help you understand that, and there are multiple things you can do to get that understanding for your own enterprise application landscape. Okay, so now that you understand how end users use your applications and what your business looks like and what your business processes look like, you can then look at how do you automate testing of those business processes. So here, again, like I said earlier, instead of focusing on testing individual applications, you can look at, okay, what does your end-to-end business process flow look like? What's the front-end application? What are the back-end applications? What things need to happen to do everything, right? So it's not enough just to test one part of one application, because most of the failures occur when you have complex integration between multiple applications. You have to test the whole business flow. You have to test the variations. So focusing on end-to-end processes is really important, because that's what really matters to your business. Because each individual applications presumably have been tested by your development team, or have been tested by, let's say, the vendor of the cloud application that you're using, but they won't consider your specific use of multiple applications in combination, right? So that's what you have to worry about in this end-to-end business process focus. Okay. The third part, again, like I said before, is the velocity of testing needs to match the velocity of change. And here again, automation can help, because you can run these tests in unattended mode, and you can actually do a lot in very little time, right? So you don't have to allocate a great deal of time to test something that you're going to deploy into production. Your testing speed can match your continuous integration, continuous delivery speeds if you do automation correctly, right? So testing continuously is really important. And finally, right, you can also use the cloud to scale your automation. So here again, right, you can distribute testing across hundreds of cloud machines, once again getting it done quickly, right? So in minutes, you can make sure that all critical functionality is still working when you're going to deploy a change in production. And this is done much more effectively if you distribute your automation across multiple machines in the cloud, and you set up and tear down resources as you require them, right, to get the most cost-effective outcome here, right? So you can just spin up the machines you need when you need them, run your automation, and then spin them down when you're done. Okay? So summarizing the approach, right? Focus on the end user, make sure that you're automating end-to-end process flows, test continuously, and then use the cloud to your advantage to scale out your automation and get that done at an order of magnitude faster than you're normally used to. Okay, so let's now look at a case study that highlights some of these things and the benefits that were achieved by that company. So the company I'm talking about is a large, very large European luxury goods manufacturer based out of Switzerland. And you may not have heard of the company, but you have definitely heard of their brands, right? So they do watches, they do jewelry, they do all kinds of high-end retail luxury products. And for this company, right, so if you're spending, $200,000 to buy a watch, you want that experience to be flawless. So they have to make sure that everything runs perfectly and that end user experience, the customer has an experience that is unmatched and unparalleled, and that creates, their brand identity and their premium feel when people go into their stores or when people buy luxury goods through this company, right? So it's very important to them that things work flawlessly. So they had, of course, like any other large customer, a number of different applications. They have SAP, and within SAP they have numerous different SAP applications, all cloud applications, point of sale applications, e-commerce applications, multiple device types, and so on. And all of this has to run together without any downtime, right? So of course there's a lot of digital risk here, right? Anything can go wrong anytime, especially if you have 1,740 retail shops all over the world, and you want to make sure that all those systems are up and running all the time. And this, of course, took them a lot of effort to run and maintain if you want to do this manually, right? And they were getting to a point where it was almost impossible to do testing manually, so they looked at automation approaches. Next slide. So what they did was they ended up automating a number of their end-to-end business processes that were critical for various parts of the business. And they're now able to do 600 hours of daily testing on about 30 virtual machines. And of course, this number keeps increasing, so this slide is about a year old. Those numbers have gone up. But the whole idea, again, is let the software help you, let automation help you. Like Matthias was saying, automation now is the essential co-worker for the digital age. So use that, right? Use that to your advantage. Get an additional 600 hours every day of unattended testing, for your application landscape. So they were able to achieve that. It's practical, it's real, it's not something that we just talk about. It's being implemented and run every single day. Of course, now that covers close to 80% of their critical business, over 500 core processes, and each of those core processes, of course, has multiple variations, and then they're doing this daily, right? So the end result of doing all of this is, of course, there's a significant reduction in the amount of defects or downtime that they have in their systems. So overall customer satisfaction, overall quality goes up, and also you save a lot of time, right? So in this case, they're saving 55,000 hours of manual labor, every year, right? And that number again is almost doubled. And where do they go from here next, right? So where people are looking at now, if you look at the current state of the art, is these guys want automation now for everything within their enterprise application landscape. And they want to go to 1,000 virtual machines. So think about it, right? Think about running automation at that kind of scale, so that everything is covered all the time, and they can feel, confident that all of their systems will work and work well. So to summarize all of the things I've said, right? Looking at a practical strategy means that you begin small and then you build up to these kind of levels, right? And focus on practical things, focus on things that matter most today, and get those things automated first, and then build upon your success as you move forward through the process. And when I say automation, it's not just automating the testing, it's also automating the understanding of how end users actually use your applications and what your actual business looks like first, and then using that understanding to get automation to be more effective. And then on top of that, using analytics, including predictive and cognitive analytics, to figure out what's really important on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute basis, and then tuning your testing to match that. Okay, next slide, Matthias. Okay, so now with that, I can hand back to Matthias to wrap up, and then we'll answer the questions that come in.
Thanks, Shoaib. So let me briefly wrap up 3 key things that testing organizations need to respond to. On the one hand, your testing strategy needs to be liquid. It needs to be able to adapt to all the challenges that we're seeing. Shoaib mentioned that, we want to be able to test everything, automate everything. We don't even know what everything is anymore in many cases, which means we need the analytics that Shoaib described to tell us which are the important pieces. We need to take a look at performance and security testing, which has been more or less the stepchild in many organizations. We need to understand when do we use it and how do we use it, and we need to be able to really embrace DevOps and Agile. It shouldn't be that you have a DevOps organization, then a testing organization tests after that. Those silos don't make any sense. We need to be able to be in those teams and test alongside with them, and we need to embrace that. On the other hand, we need to invest in platforms. We need to invest in the right architecture so that we can replicate those scenarios. And again, for that, we need intelligence. We need cognitive testing to understand what should we focus on. And then finally, our resourcing strategy needs to take a look at not only the skills we have in testing and revamp those skills, we also need to take a look at IT operations. How do we include them at the business people, at crowd testing, so that we augment not only the capacity, but the skills and the insights that we have. So with these 3 topics, I'm more than happy to take your questions, and we'll open up for questions, Dara.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I just have 1 or 2 other slides to go through before we have a look at your questions. So I'm just going to open up my screen once more. Now, in just over 3 weeks' time, the early bird deadline will come to a close. So if you'd like to avail of a 10% discount on tickets to EuroSTAR, please do so now. And you can find out all the details about this early bird discount over on the EuroSTAR website. We have some more webinars coming up soon that I think you'll be interested in. We have a webinar here in early September that looks at continuous testing, the key to increasing delivery speed and quality in your DevOps pipeline. And we also have a webinar series that's going to be taking place from the 12th to the 16th. That'll feature a lot of big name speakers there and some really interesting topics. So if you'd like to find out about all these different webinars we have coming up, just follow the link there that I've shared with you. So let's have a look at some of your questions that have come through. The first question I have here is for you, Matthias. It says, our company is clearly behind. Where do you recommend we get started developing a digital strategy?
Thanks. My recommendation would be to take a look at the business processes that you're supporting and to take a very clear look at what your users are doing out there. If you say that the company is clearly behind, most often I hear that when we talk about, okay, the mobile devices that we are out there, we have a lab and we have 10 mobile devices sitting on a table. Let's look at a tool to solve that problem and to virtualize some of that. That's one step in the whole game. What you need to take a look at is the applications and the business processes you're supporting. How are they actually being used? And you can use some exploratory testing. You can do a lot of analytics around that to really understand what does it mean for me. And then the next step should be to consolidate a lot of the testing that you're doing in order to replicate as little as possible throughout the different phases of your life cycle, throughout the individual stages, and to make sure that your overall digital testing strategy takes a look at that, takes a look at how do I get quality into my requirements, how can I maybe derive test cases out of my requirements, what does that mean if I have user stories, how do I turn those user stories into something that's really testable, and then you can take a look along the way at individual tools, but you should start by using analytics and trying to understand all the different pieces, and instead of testing one application after the other, test the business process end to end. Whether you do that manually or automated is a productivity lever. At the end of the day, you need to understand this is the area that I can cover with my testing, this is the area that I cannot cover with my testing, and therefore I need to prepare my IT operations team, my business operations team for anything that I cannot test.
Okay, I've another question as well for you here, Matthias, that asks, should my digital testing team be separate from my other IT testing staff? Do you recommend a centralized shared service for the entire company?
What I recommend as a starting point is, yes, to have separate teams, because the way of working is quite different, and you will incorporate a lot of change into your traditional testing team if you fully put the digital team and the digital applications into that team. On the other hand, the digital teams have different market requirements, and you need to be able to adapt to that first. So my recommendation would be to stabilize those teams first, let them work on projects together, and then consolidate that. That was actually also a question we posed to the industry in the PR research that I mentioned, so use the link in the resources to see what they have answered. Many clients have started with separate organizations. Some have tried to combine those organizations at the beginning. My recommendation would be take a look at the people and treat it as a change management project. You cannot simply say we'll all go agile, we'll all test digital now. You need to take a look at the skill set of your people and the motivation of them. Why are they actually testing? And then you can change that and ultimately consolidate that.
A question here for you, Shob, and they're asking here, we do mostly manual testing but are interested in adding automation. Is the goal to move to 100% automation?
Well, so I think you don't get to 100% automation. That's not practical, but you do get to a very high degree of automation. We typically see customers get to about 80%. Now, doing automation is not as hard as it used to be in the past, right? Because solutions have improved quite a bit. So if you use, for example, if you use our solution from WorkSoft, automating manual tests is just like running them one time, right? So if you can run your manual test one time and add a certain amount of additional time on top of it, so let's say another 20%, you can then get an automated test, and you're done with that, right? And that goes as part of your library. So I think a lot of people get intimidated by automation, and getting automation done is not that hard these days. It's almost as easy as running manual tests and getting them converted.
I have another question here for you, Matthias, and this person here is asking, what do you see as the most disruptive thing companies are facing right now?
That's a good question. I think what I see most often is that, and then I also see that was one of the questions by Ines in the chat, the disruption out there with a lot of digital application, with platforms that influence you a lot more is something that all companies see. I think the biggest disruptor will be that we, and in certain industries we have realized that already, is that we have crunched our release cycles and our time we have available, our budgets, our capacity down to such a low number that it's virtually impossible to think about where do I get budget from, where do I get the time to improve things, how do I actually revamp everything without disrupting business. So I think it's an internal disruptor really that I see as the biggest challenge. We have all kinds of things changing, but we've had those for the past 20 years. I think the challenge now is that there's simply little space left to say, okay, we'll just steer the whole ship in a different direction. We'll start with this, we'll start with that. And I think this is where you then need to take a look at change management. This is where you need to take a look at the people you have to say, look, these are things you can use out of the box. It doesn't require a completely new skill set. But if we collaborate a lot more, we can remove waste out of the whole process. We can remove redundancy. We don't need to test the same thing over and over again. Instead, we test it once, and such we free up capacity. I think that's the biggest disruptor, that people have been testing in their silos for a long time. They have been testing along their processes, along their certifications for a long time, and they have stopped thinking about what they're doing, is that the right thing, and where do we see redundancies that can be removed.
Shob, another question for you here. We have thousands of business processes. How do you determine which business processes to test first? What is considered critical?
Yeah, so I mean, you start with the basics again, right? I mean, you take some of your, for example, order to cash processes, right? The ones that run your business, and that's a pretty straightforward process. So determining what is critical shouldn't be very hard because people already know this, within your business, right? So getting your business involved, getting your functional analysts, your business analysts involved in the process would really help you get there. People generally don't have thousands of processes, right? Typically you have a few hundred, if that, core processes, and those are the ones you do need to focus on. I feel like, a number of other questions that have come up that sort of have a pattern, so I'll take a shot at one more that I see asked at least 3 times. So the question here is, people are kind of surprised about 600 hours of daily testing, right? So they're like, okay, running 600 hours of daily testing, how do you actually keep up, right? How much time does it take to analyze the test results? Isn't that a contradiction? And the answer is absolutely not, right? That's the beauty of automation, because you're only dealing with exceptions. Right? So when you run 600 hours of automated tests every day, you're only dealing with the failures or the problems that the tests identify. You're not dealing at all with things that succeed or pass or have no problems, right? So what happens for customers that do this is, they run this typically in the night, and then when people come in the morning, you have them look at the failures and then focus on failures that are actual application failures and go fix them, right? It didn't cost you anything to run the 600 hours of automated testing. It's free, right? It's just the machines wake up, the machines run the test, the machines shut down, everything's done for you. So really it doesn't take a lot of work to manage or analyze the results because you're only dealing with failures or things that have gone wrong, right?
Okay.
The other question that also comes, the other question that's also come up a couple of times, and this is to Matthias, is, what's the difference between intelligent risk-based testing and regular risk-based testing? And what's all this intelligence, right? What is intelligent automation? Why intelligence is so important? Matthias, could you take that?
Sure. I've tried to answer it in the question box as well. The difference really is the analytics part. If you look at the example you gave, Shoaib, around automated business process discovery, to really visualize how processes are being used, which parameters and values are being used in production or even in your test environment. That will guide you a lot more in your risk-based testing approach than previously. Previously, we were to sit down with our business analysts and try to derive risk based on conversations we had with them. We already have data available. We already know what's happening in certain case of certain failures, apart from those systems that are really brand new. But most of the time, we test existing systems, we test existing business processes, so we should use that data. And analytics plays a key part in intelligent risk-based testing, and this is something that we ideally need to automatically push into our testing strategy.
Okay, guys. I think we've gone a little bit over time here, so we might just wrap it up at that. And I'd like to thank our two presenters today, Matthias Rasking from Accenture and Shob Javed from WorkSoft. They covered an awful lot of material there, and I'm sure you'd be happy to know it's recorded and the slides will be available as well over on Huddle very shortly. So that's it from us. Thank you all very much for taking the time out to attend. We hope to see you at future webinars.
Thanks everyone, and thanks Derek for hosting us today. Bye.